Superheroes. Today, they're all over the media, in movies, TV, and especially comic books.
But did you know that these superheroes would have been way different without the help of one man?
This man defied the unfair censorship guarding comic books and saved the comic industry. His name is Stan Lee.
In 1971, the Department of Health approached Stan Lee to write an anti-drug comic in a time where even the mention of drugs couldn't be put in comic books thanks to the Comics Code Authority. Stan Lee published the comic anyways, leading to the downfall of the CCA, who was putting unfair restrictions on comic books. The action inspired other comic publishers to do the same thing, and the comic industry changed forever. Once the CCA was disbanded, all of the comic publishers were allowed to oversee what content went into their own comic books, letting us enjoy the comics we know and love today, and we have Stan Lee to thank for this.
Stan Lee, born Stanley Martin Lieber, is an American comic book author and the creator of some of the most popular heroes of all time, such as Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the Fantastic Four.
Since 1954, an organization called the Comics Code Authority, the CCA for short, had been putting restrictions on comic books. They made rules that certain things could not be put into comic books. Some of these rules were fair, but some of them were completely ridiculous.
For instance, comic publishers could not put the words terror, crime, or horror on the title of a comic book.
Such rules like these only made it harder to publish a comic book since the CCA had a seal of approval that they put on comics that they approved.
The CCA was not a part of the government, so it seemed like the comic publishers could just sell their comics without the seal of approval, right? Wrong. Many comic stores refused to sell comics that didn't have the seal of approval.
One of the rules of the CCA was that the mention of drugs was completely prohibited. This seemed like a good rule at first, but it got in the way of things when the Department of Health wanted Marvel to do an anti-drug comic.
The year was 1971. There was a lot going on back then, such as the Vietnam War, but something else happened that not many people know about, and it changed the comic industry forever.
Naturally, the Department of Health approached Stan Lee, Marvel's best and most popular writer.
Stan Lee, the creator of one of the most popular and influential superheroes of all time, Spider-Man, was the obvious choice. Many children, one of the main audiences of comic books, looked up to Spider-Man.
When the Department of Health asked Stan if he could make an anti-drug issue, he decided to help them since it was a noble cause.
He wrote the comic titled Green Goblin Reborn, which featured a story plot that continued the Spider-Man story, but had a side plot of a main character who started to abuse drugs.
After Stan Lee finished the comic, he sent it to the CCA to get it approved with the seal of approval, but they sent it back to be revised.
The Comics Code Authority refused to put the seal of approval on the comic because it contains the mention of drugs.
Even though the inclusion of drugs was a good cause, the CCA wouldn't let Stan publish the comic.
After a lot of thinking, Stan Lee decided that he would publish the story anyways, knowing that he could risk the comic not being sold.
Well, it's one time when I was very proud of my publisher. I said, Martin, I want to put these books out anyway.
He thought that not publishing it would do more harm than publishing it against the CCA's wishes.
After publishing it, the comic was loved by children and parents alike. Stan Lee got a lot of praise for writing the comic and teaching lessons about drug abuse.
We put them out without the seal. They sold beautifully. We got letters from church groups, parent teachers, and so everybody loved it.
After seeing the success of this comic, other comic publishers like DC Comics, creator of Batman, Superman, and many other popular heroes, started to defy the CCA and do their own anti-drug stories.
Over time, more and more publishers stopped using the CCA's seal of approval.
Eventually, in 2011, there were only 2 publishers still using the CCA.
Soon, even those 2 stopped using the seal, and the CCA was disbanded for good. Comic publishers were free to do whatever they wanted with their comics.
And we have one man to thank for this, Stan Lee.